and I really want to thank Rabbi Uzi Beer for being with us today. Uzi is actually the principal of the Jewish Educational Center, JEC, their lower school in New Jersey. And almost 20 years ago, Uzi's uncle, Alan Beer, was killed on my bus in Jerusalem. And I didn't know Uzi before. I didn't know his family before, but they definitely have become part of my family in a very big way. I just spent the day with Uzi and his family yesterday, which was lovely. Uzi has served in the IDF, and him and his wife Rachel have two beautiful children, Liana and Zahava, who are just really incredible. And I want to thank Uzi for taking time out of his schedule. This is not easy, not just because he's very busy and there's a lot going on, but we've discussed this and we know this. And I discussed this in the beginning. 20 years is a long time. And while it hasn't been easy for me over the last few months, I think Uzi also has been feeling the anniversary weighing heavy and coming up. And I really want to thank you for taking this time, because I think it's really important for people to hear Alan's story from a family member, because he wasn't just a number, he was a name. He did so much good in the world. And I really felt like, as the 20th anniversary is coming up, that this is an opportunity for you to honor his memory and to keep it alive by sharing. So I'm going to give it over to you, Uzi, but I really want to thank you for being here and for giving us a little bit of your time to share about how incredible and what happened to Alan on that day almost 20 years ago.
So thank you, Sari. I very much do appreciate the platform as well. I think when it comes to the 20th, I think you and I are looking at this very differently. It's very impactful. I think my gut is to I can't. I'm not embracing. I'm not dealing with it. When they hit the 20, that's one part of it, and it's just not a thought that I even want to think about. 20 years is a very long time, but I appreciate that you kind of pushed me into preparing even and thinking even more about my uncle. And if I were to choose what I want to share with the world, with everybody here, I do definitely have some thoughts that come to mind. My uncle was someone that I really connected with and looked up to. His laugh was prominent and could be heard over others. His personality, super friendly, that on multiple occasions, I had friends that when I was in yeshiva in Israel, came back from a day, whether at Misrata Panim, or from the movies, or from the Shuk, or Ben Yehuda, basically anywhere that you would go in Israel. And they all came to share with me how, oh, guess what, Uzi? We met your uncle. What a really nice guy. And my jaw dropped every time. Like, how do you know my uncle? What's the story? And each one almost verbatim would say, well, I happened to be somewhere and this guy just started talking to me, or he looked like he knew what he was doing and he was so helpful. One after the next. And they were always talking about how helpful, sincere, and just welcoming my uncle was. He was that person who would start up a conversation with anyone and everyone, which is another thing that I reflect back. And as somebody who is so judged, I don't recall him judging others. And he never let it stop him from being who he was. When I was younger, my uncle lived in Cleveland. I loved spending time with my uncle. He then decided to move to California, which was really hard. He used to come by all the time, and now he's in California. We didn't see him that much. However, every time that he came to visit, whether it was Pesach, whether it was Thanksgiving, or really just because, one of the things that I was adamant about and that became really special is that he always was my roommate. He always stayed in my room. After all, I did deem him Uncle Dude. And as comical as it sounds that I used to call him that, I remember that some of his close friends, while my dad was sitting Shiva, would share about how much my uncle loved that title. And the other thing that they would reference is that every time that it was time to go back home, I would latch onto his ankles and never let him leave. It was part of the routine. It was the shtick. But it was my relationship with my uncle. My uncle then moved on to Hawaii. While there, he took on a major role in the community and synagogue. And while I'm not sure if he was just a regular lay leader or if he acted as the rabbi, I really couldn't get a clear picture. But I saw pictures of him officiating over weddings and other ceremonies. My uncle was the doer. He cared for others, and he always had a smile on his face. If there was something that had to get done, my uncle would be like, okay, great, let's get it done. Let's figure out how to do this, and let's just do it. Let's get rid of all the other stuff. Let's just get it done. So at that point, soon after Hawaii, my uncle decided he was going to make Aliyah, move to Israel, and was living there for a while. And then in 2002, while I was in college, my uncle came back for my grandmother's 76th birthday. That visit back for my grandmother's birthday ended up turning into a more significant amount of time, approximately 4 or 5 months, so that he could spend time with his mother, my grandmother. His thought was that he wanted to spend quality time with my grandmother as she was getting older before she passed. Thank God he did, since it ended up being such a gift from my grandmother, my parents, my siblings, myself. It's unclear in the end who went to visit, who is seeing who. With my focus since Yeshiva in Israel, being on joining the Israeli army at Tzahal, I remember clearly at my college graduation when my parents got in a car service to LaGuardia on their way back to Cleveland, and I got in a car service on my way to JFK to join Tzahal, to fly to Israel and join Tzahal. At that point, my uncle was already back in Israel. And as I prepared for Tzahal, both for how to serve as a religious soldier, as well as all the physical and psychological exams, I spent some of the Shabbases while in Israel with my uncle, where we had some deep, meaningful conversations about life, choices, Zionism, and fulfilling dreams of Aliyah. So it was after finishing all my checks and tests and paperwork for Tzahal, I got my scores, I got my Tzav Giyus, the time for when I'm supposed to actually show up to join the army. And there was about a month lag. So at that point, I was still permitted to leave the country. So I figured, okay, great. I'm going to go back, have my last summer of running summer camp before I join the army. Of course, the theme was Tzahal. It was a few days before I needed to be up in camp when I was at home and the phone rang. My father was home with me at the time and he says, I got it. And he answers the phone. And all of a sudden, a very short while later, my father calls me over, Uzi, can you come over here? It's like, I don't understand what this person's saying. Can you please, what's he saying? So I pick up the phone and I say, Shalom, in my most Israeli accent that I could be, because now like I'm joining Tzahal, I have to be Israeli. And I'm like, hey, Slicha, Odpam, can you say that again? Ma? Alan met? Be'emet tagid Odpam. And again. Alan is dead? How could that be? I had just seen him a week ago when I was in Israel. It was on June 11th, 2003, that my uncle, while on the 14 Aleph bus that traveled down Jaffa, a terrorist dressed in Haredi garb boarded the bus and detonated himself. My cousin, who was working for Magen David Adom at the time, was one of the first on the scene, not knowing that our uncle was on that bus. He happened to be the first to recognize my uncle. And I do have to share that one happy thought that still comforts me is that when my uncle was found, his body was fully intact, at least on the outside. And the way that my cousin described it, it gave me such nechama, such comfort, in that my uncle died in the same way he lived, with a smile on his face. I don't know how he always had a smile, but that's how he'll forever be remembered. And I remember from that point on, one, as my father had to drive over to my grandmother's house to share with her that her son had been killed, the tone, the mood, everything changed in the house. I remember my parents trying to persuade me from joining Tzahal. That wasn't successful. Then they started asking me, please, please, just don't board a bus when you're in Israel. Take a taxi, do whatever you need, just don't board a bus. Even that, I just couldn't do. I couldn't agree. For me, what started out as ideological now had even more of a purpose. Every bus ride carried a purpose. Me being able to stand there in uniform as part of Tzahal, as being part of what provides protection, provides comfort. Being able to do that in a land that not only do I dream of living, but a land that my uncle moved his life and dedicated his life for. That's where I had to be. That's what I had to do. My uncle believed in living his life with purpose and through joy. It's so hard to believe that it's been 20 years. I loved my uncle, and his memory will always be a call to focus on what's important in life and not to get caught up in all the window dressings and the periphery. But I do have to say, there's one more thing that I am truly grateful for. When I think of all the heartache caused on that fateful June 11th, there was a silver lining. Sari Singer was on that bus with my uncle, and Baruch Hashem, she lived. My uncle connected me with Sari. She has been a source of strength, support. She's a dear friend. She's family. And as I try to live my life with purpose and joy, I hope that I'm a source of pride for my uncle.
Thank you, Uzi, and thank you for not letting the terrorists win. We're going to serve in the IDF, but taking those buses, I know when I live in Israel and every time there's an attack, I'm like, okay, my kids mustn't drive here, they mustn't go in a bus, they mustn't walk in the street, they mustn't go to school. But ultimately, the way we win is to make sure that we show our strength by living. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you, Sari, again, for being this incredible source of strength to everyone.
Well, I I'm the lucky one, and Uzi is definitely family. We know that. And, you know, it's hard. There's a lot of emotions running, and I know it's different for each of us, Uzi, and in the upcoming anniversary. But I think that, first of all, I think that Alan will be so proud of you, of everything that you do and every way you live your life. And just the way you spoke about him, every time I hear something about him from you, I just think is so important, because his memory, he lives on through you and through your family. And the little things that you've said about him just really make people understand, you know, that these are not just numbers on a screen when you hear about it, you know, when you hear about a terrorist attack happening in Israel. These are real people with real lives and families and everything. And this is the impact of it. And I'm just wondering, you know, what, I guess, what you feel Alan would have been the most, you know, happy if he were here. Like, what would they have been the most happy to see about what's, you know, about your life, about your family?
Honestly, I think my girls. I think he, unfortunately, my uncle never had children. So I think that's one of the reasons why we connected with him so much, that he so loved us in so many ways. And to be able to see that care, that concern, that love being passed forward another generation, I think he would have loved to be able to meet all of his great nephews and nieces. Like, I think it would have just meant the world to him.